tonight we're going to be focusing on geography and the way that, that geography impacts access to resources and support for new ventures and social entrepreneurs in particular. First of all, I want to thank Lauren Rogers and the team here at General Assembly for hosting this panel series, and to all of our participants here on the panel. Yeah, we can give them a hoot, a holler, and a round of applause. We'll go through introductions in just a second, but my name is George Tsiatis. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of the Resolution Project. For those of you who are new to our work, the Resolution Project's mission is to develop socially responsible leaders and empower them to make a positive impact today. We were founded in 2007 to provide a unique pathway to action for aspiring young people committed to changing the world and their home communities far and wide through social entrepreneurship. Through the work that they've done, our 450 Resolution Fellows from 77 countries and 21 US states have impacted over 1.6 million people around the world. That's the power of young people to create change. That's the power of social entrepreneurs to impact the communities that they know, that they love, that they come from, and that they want to see move past some of the systemic issues that have plagued those communities for a long time. You know, we've sort of delved into a zone with these conversations where there's a lot to cover. The sort of concept of underrepresented voices in any space is it's so rich for exploration, and I want to be very clear that in no way are we going to be able to do more than scratch the surface on this. What we're trying to do is start a conversation here. So there will definitely be time at the end of the panel for questions. I would encourage you to think about you know, areas that you'd like us to explore further and push us a little bit on those topics. And of course, after the panel, we'll have some time. We've got light refreshments in the back, help yourself to them. But we'll hang around for a bit afterwards to continue the conversation as well. The last thing I have is a little PSA, which is we have a third and final panel of this series scheduled for April 3rd, and that will be broaching the topic of race and ethnicity. So again, on the same topic of underrepresented voices and social entrepreneurship, we'll be exploring that to round out this series. And if you enjoyed tonight's discussion, if you have a specific interest in exploring that conversation, if you just like being a part of what you can learn from people who've done it, we'd encourage you to join us again for that, whether it's in person or online. So, I got through all the housekeeping stuff. You'll notice that we have a setup here that's a little different from usual. I'll very quickly introduce all of our panelists, and then we'll spend a little bit of time with Julia, who was kind enough to video conference in, going through a few questions first because we may have to, depending on how strong the technology is, call it after we get the benefit of her insight up front. But if the technology does hold up, we'll sort of run it as a traditional panel and pretend that she's just on a very large chair over there. So just to introduce our panel, I've already mentioned Julia, but Julia Kumari Drapkin is the founder and CEO of I See Change. Furthest away from me in person is Dawn Musil, a co-founder of Hiveland and a Resolution Fellow. Next to her is Ankur Gopal, the founder and CEO of Interact. And right next to me here is Meagan Hill, founder and CEO of the Sovereign Nations Group. So we have a lot of exciting and different experiences, different journeys to go through. And I'd really like to, especially as we sort of think about geography, places, right? What it means to move between things, to maybe use that as the basis for our introductions. talk a little bit about the journey that you've taken, the places it has taken you, and maybe share with us a note of sort of why you find yourself in the place that you are now. So why don't we start with Meagan, work our way down. Julia, why don't you go last, and then we'll go through a few questions with you.
Okay, perfect. So I grew up about an hour outside of Toronto, close to a Native American reservation. It's called Six Nations. It's the largest Native American reservation in Canada. On that land and in that community are 6 different nations. Mohawk is one of those nations, and I am from the Mohawk Nation. And so I was in Canada up until college, where I then came over to the US. But what was interesting was that unlike my other Canadian friends, I didn't have to deal with H-1Bs or any sort of visa, because there's actually a special treaty between Canada and the United States that allows Canadian-born Native Americans who are at least 50% or more Native to just live and work in the US without any formal documentation. And that was based on Natives being citizens of North America. And so I've been here in the US since graduating from college in 2011. And I go back and forth between Canada and the US. And at the moment, I am based here in New York, but I spent a lot of time in Cambridge, Massachusetts, because I do continuing work with Harvard, where I went to school. And I spent a lot of time on other Native reservations. So there's about 567 nations in the US and about 600 in Canada, and they're all sovereign. They all have their own land in communities, and so I tend to hop around from nation to nation if I'm not here in the city.
Hello everyone, I'm Ankur Gopal. I'm CEO and founder of Interact. We are a IT services and IT training firm located in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm born in Owensboro, Kentucky. My parents were immigrants from India, went to school here, used education to kind of better their life, and landed in Owensboro, where my dad wanted to kind of see real America in the 60s and 70s. Growing up there, as you can imagine, it was a rural setting in a small town, about 70,000 people. And as you grow in that area, success generally meant getting out, coming to Chicago, coming to New York. And I did exactly that, and went to school at the University of Illinois and in Chicago, and wound up working as a consultant for Accenture as my first job, and lived in DC, lived in New York, lived in Silicon Valley. And when I decided to take my entrepreneurial sort of leap and start my own company, I had no intentions of ever coming back to Kentucky. In fact, my mom will tell you I'm the least likely child of her 3 that would have come back to Kentucky. I had a lot of big ideas and dreams, what have you. But as we were incubating our company and we were building a services firm that had a niche of cutting-edge tech, mobile app development, cloud-based technologies, etc. When we planned on moving to Silicon Valley, but I decided the 11th hour to incubate for 6 months longer in Kentucky. And so I went back home in mom and dad's basement, took some of my team with me, and basically we found that there was a need right where we were in our backyard. We have great companies there. We have like companies like Humana, Kindred, Yum, a lot of large global brands and companies that need what we were selling. So I decided to say, well, we can always go to San Francisco whenever we want. Let's stay here for a year and see what happens. Well, that was 7 years ago, and we're still there. We've expanded into other cities in like Atlanta, Eastern Kentucky, Detroit, places like that. But as we were growing our company, kind of where we found our sort of mission and purpose was we had trouble finding talent. We were growing. We had found a niche where we were a big player in a small pond, and trying to recruit talent from New York and Silicon Valley and Boulder and Austin was a little tough. To give you some perspective, I did 117 interviews. Well, we did 117 interviews in 2015 and got 7. Those are awful HR numbers for anyone in the business. But we had the craziest of reasons, and they were ranging from there's no Nordstroms here, which and to where, yeah, there's no direct flights to London. I mean, something. So we just whatever. So rather than fight the recruiting battle and compete like we were, I said, you know what? I just want to find smart people and good people that want to stay here, and I'll just train them up. And we did that. And so we solved our own business problem by creating a training program, and we took college graduates that had maybe a humanities degree, or they had they want to do a career change or something. We trained them in IT, and we got them to a level where we could build them out, where they could fit in our company. And around that same time, our governor and congressman heard about it and said, can you do that in Eastern Kentucky, where there's a lot of job loss and job displacement because of the decline of the coal industry? And I said, well, I don't know, I'll try. So I asked my whole team, do you want to do this? And they all was a unanimous yes. They said this could be really impactful and really help a lot of people. And so we went there 6 months, 8 to 5 training, where we paid people to learn, to flip the model, because usually it's a $15,000 boot camp that comes in, and that's and not one person in our program could ever afford that, or had the time to take away from helping their family pay their bills. So we basically paid them. We paid them a stipend to learn, and that was their job for the first 6 months. 35 out of 50 passed. All 35 are still in an IT role 3 years later. They're making upwards of $80,000 a year, which is a pretty hefty ransom in the Midwest. But they have upward mobility is the most important thing. We trained them in a way that we weren't going to train them for like call center jobs. You're a junior full stack developer or bust. And if you got that, you're learning other languages, you have the ability to control your own destiny in your own career. And that's what we did. And that model is what we kind of got a lot of national attention for. And that's how we allowed us to expand. So that's kind of our story of how we created a sort of social mission, but we're a for-profit company. So practicing conscious capitalism is something that's ingrained in our fabric. So that's kind of our journey, and how I wound up getting back to Kentucky after kind of having some wanderlust around the rest of the country.
So I started off in the Midwest. I grew up in Southern Ohio on a farm keeping bees. That's the bee shirt. But that's been my consistent theme everywhere that I've been. So I became a Resolution Fellow on a semester at Sea Voyage in 2014, starting with a bee project called Be the Change, and that continued to build out urban beekeeping in Southern Ohio, or I guess Central Ohio at Ohio State. And then things have shifted from there. That's still going on with the AmeriCorps, but I went and lived in Colombia and South America and worked with Africanized bees there and in Panama for a while. And just kind of saw the differences in the way people work with them there. They're critical to agriculture, and a lot of the work that's happening there with some of the farmers losing their crops to coffee rust. So then fast forward 2 years later, and I guess a year and a half later, and I'm now based in Baltimore. My company is called Hiveland. I met another passionate beekeeper who had also seen that it's really cool to work on a small scale with hives, but there's a lot bigger issues in this space that we need to apply technology to. And so what we have is an online platform that connects beekeepers and farmers to facilitate sustainable pollination. So commercial beekeepers are losing thousands of hives, upwards of 30-40% annually, which are really unsustainable losses. But we have sideliners and hobbyists who have no idea how to get their bees to farms. And so that's what our platform facilitates. And this ends up having our focus in the Midwest, where I grew up, and all across kind of the large growing regions. So Mid-Atlantic is where we're based now. You've got lots of melons. Out west, you've got tons of almonds. And throughout the whole Midwest, you have crops that need pollination. So it's kind of been a really cool journey following the bees to different places, and it's also how I love to travel, is exploring new bee species. So.
Great. Julia, you're probably not going to catch the visual cues, so you're up.
Okay. Well, firstly, just listening to these inspiring stories, it's wonderful to be here amongst you all. Similarly, I think we all have found that, at least with my company, I see change. locating where the needs are and where the problems are is where we can innovate the fastest. And I'm a Gulf Coast native. I grew up on a Barrett Island off the coast of Florida, and I live in New Orleans. And I See Change, we mobilize communities to collect their stories and their data to inform infrastructure design and adaptation. And I have a background I was a climate science reporter. I was a global correspondent. I worked in South America as a correspondent, in South Asia. I was, did the whole megalopolis, New York, Boston, DC. And I was in DC when I had the idea for I See Change on the back of a napkin. And I got funding, though, to do it in rural Colorado, in a town of less than around 2,000 people. Half the town worked in coal mines, so I resonate with that story in particular, and they were not going to have a climate change startup project in their town. So we had to find ways to have a conversation about climate change in this town. I did not originally want to go. Again, I didn't, as a reporter with a career, I said, well, this project is not about, the Peace Corps of journalism. Like, this is something bigger. It was very arrogant, actually. And I landed in the town, and the main street was like 3 blocks long, and I cried the first day. But we had 9 months of funding to try out something completely different in terms of digital media, public radio, and this climate change idea of crowdsourcing. And working in that town, people would stop me in the street and tell me how to do I See Change better. We learned incredible innovations from this community of ranchers and farmers and gardeners who pay attention to change and are impacted by it daily. Farmers, beekeepers, when their bees are waking up in January, we know there's a problem in Colorado. So, and they showed us during a very anomalous weather year in 2012, on par with the Dust Bowl it proved out to be, that farmers, I'd say, well, how do you adapt to extremes like this? And he said, well, and got up, a farmer went and got a composition notebook off a shelf and showed me. He's like, well, this is like 1977. And he opened it up, and there was like a little story with a little bit of data about what he did on his farm, how he adapted to change, what was going on with the weather. And I realized, it was like reading a tweet from the Dust Bowl. And we actually found journals that go back to the Dust Bowl of people doing this. It was an incredible innovation and insight about how to adapt to climate change. But it had never been digitized, it had never been socialized. We never added sensors or satellites to this kind of very fundamental way of talking about how weather and climate impact our daily lives. We went global after it was successful. We built it actually for this small town, but then people from all around the world started to use it. We went global with NASA as a partner, and we had people all around the world using I See Change. But what we realized was having the conversation at that level wasn't really able to have the impact that we wanted. So we had a pilot in Harlem that showed us a lot about how to do this around urban heat, working with sensors and kind of using stories to model indoor urban heat. And then I said, well, wait a minute, what about New Orleans? This is my hometown where I live. Why don't we do it here? Let's see if we can do a pilot on flooding. Our I See Change has been headquartered in New Orleans since 2013, but I never actually launched projects in New Orleans until recently in my hometown. And from this innovation, we have our first commercial clients. We've developed our own way to crowdsource hydrology and flooding, and the technologies and the methods that we've developed in New Orleans are now being used on the eastern seaboard. We have pilots now, in the Bronx, Ocean City, New Jersey, communities all along the Gulf Coast and small communities on the East Coast who are experiencing persistent flooding. So the innovations that come from being in your own community, like adapting to the problems, that's priceless. I mean, we have a distributed team. We definitely have suffered in terms of trying to find local talent and engineers, but in terms of being far away from capital or conversations, I live in New Orleans, so a lot of people come to me, right? We have tons and tons of conferences constantly coming in. So when we were really, really tight and bootstrapping, we were able to kind of sink into bigger picture conversations and using the digital tools to allow us to work remotely.
Great, thanks all for those honestly deeply personal introductions and for sharing so much of your own journeys. Julia, if we could just stick with you for a second, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the way that you've flipped maybe some of those presumptions, right? The sort of presumption that that small towns have everything to learn from big cities. The presumption that big data is where it all lives, and that there isn't really value in sort of personal data, and those tend to be sort of hallmarks of smaller settings, smaller environments. Love to hear a little bit about your perspective on that, and maybe some specific examples. You noted a couple. If you've got a couple more, that'd be great.
Sorry about my slides. One of the tools we use. But absolutely, in terms of flipping the script on, I mean, that was the big moment, right? It was just realizing how much talent and how much insight were in these tiny towns, and a lot of the assumptions that we bring to the table don't really hold weight. In terms of, and so a lot of the techniques we deployed in New York. So this idea of keeping track of our stories next to the data, we used that technique in Harlem. We put sensors inside people's apartments in public housing and had them tell us stories about how they were feeling, and monitored indoor urban heat, managed to change heat policy in New York City, cooling center policies in New York. So again, just that was a technique that we developed in a rural community. In terms of the innovations being able to scale, being able to, I just think you can't see your product working unless you're close to it. Really, and being close to the problem and close to its implementation really matters, particularly when it comes to climate change, because it's a global phenomenon, but has very uniquely local impacts. So that little data really matters. And we found that we can actually verify the models, we can ground truth them, we can show them where the models are wrong, because they just don't have the scale. They don't have the granularity. And when they do, even if you have a very fine data product, it provides no context. Right? Community members can help provide the insights that the data can't. And so that little data actually, I found, is harder to get, more valuable, and big data is missing out on little data in more ways than one.
Yeah. I'm feeling pretty good about the tech setup, so I think if you're up for it, Julia, we'll let it ride. I'd love to hear other perspectives on sort of, being closer to the impact and sort of how that's helped you either refine your product faster or, identify an innovation that was something that could be shared as a learning more broadly.
Yeah, I can share one thing about, like, we have a training program. We're not an online MOOC. We're in person. But we're taking a non-traditional population and teaching them in a traditional way, right? Which is unique. Most of it is traditional students being taught in a non-traditional way, right? So we flip that too. But the fact of the matter is, most everyone in our program, not only do they not have the means to afford a boot camp or a college tuition, they didn't have the guidance to do that. So for us, being close, like being hands-on, we have an engineer that teaches the class. We have junior engineers that are teaching assistants that are responsible for making sure that everyone is moving forward and not left behind. So we've of course been told to people, oh well, why can't you just do it, in a remote? I go, the population, the people we're targeting, they're not the ones that can learn. Only 15% of the population can actually learn online through a MOOC or through a different non-traditional means. So what happens to the 85%? Right? So for us, not only did we learn that there is tremendous talent out there, but after 6 months in our program, they can learn online. They can take classes, and they do. They learn it. We have a client that says, hey, I need you to learn a new language, but for a 2-year deal, they're learning that for 2 weeks, right? And that's kind of how they get overcome that learning barrier. But we only were able to accomplish that by being in the classroom, pushing them past their limits, coaching them when they felt that times were rough, but let them know they're going to get through it. It's a very sort of beautiful process we've seen that really has business value.
So along those lines, you've each made decisions to be sort of based in a particular place. Undoubtedly, you've done the math on that, right? You've identified there are some pros, there are some cons. Can you share maybe just a couple pros and a couple of cons that have led you to sort of decide to base yourself where you are, and maybe what the hardest trade-off was for you?
One of the big things that we've started with is there's so many cool bee startups right now and bee technologies that are doing sensors, then they're doing bees on rooftops. And one of the big things that we realized is that while bees are super duper important, the reason they're so important is because of food. They pollinate food. So everyone's been talking to the beekeepers, but people haven't been talking to the farmers in particular and asking them, well, what do you look at to determine a healthy hive? Why do you need these different resources? So we started doing more and more of that, and we realized a part of it was where I ended up based from Venture for America Fellowship in Baltimore, but then being close to DC, there was a lot of legislation that happens there. So many people come to town for discussions on the Farm Bill. Lots of farmers come there to advocate for themselves, to have discussions on what we need. And there's also perfect access to people coming in and speaking to their representatives from these farmers. So while we still have to do a lot of traveling to get to those people, to get to those farms in the Midwest and the West Coast, there's a lot of people that congregate in the Mid-Atlantic where we're at, and those are the people that we need to be speaking to. The beekeepers are important, but the farmers are the ones that need the bees. So we're trying to meet them where they are.
Just taking a step back, the Sovereign Nations Group is an investment and advisory firm for indigenous governments. And so I started the company back in 2014 after my uncle was appointed CFO of the Seneca Nation, which is one of the wealthier tribes in upstate New York. And I uncovered a complex problem, which was that many of these Native American nations have significant amounts of capital, but they do not have access to the best-in-class resources that another multi-billion-dollar family would have, or a university endowment, or another sovereign nation. And so I set out to give them access to these resources. And so my decision on where to locate was really driven around ensuring that I could get access to these resources. And so New York is a great place to have access to great finance firms, consulting firms. And so really step one for my venture was finding the right partners. And so that largely drove where I needed to be. And then I would say the other main decision point was a personal point, which was that I knew after spending a year with my uncle in upstate New York, in this place called Salamanca, which is about an hour outside of Rochester, that I probably would go a little crazy if I was doing that every single day. And so for me, I sort of identified the types of environments that would help me be at my best to carry out something that is very challenging, like any startup. And so I think you also have to think about where are you going to be well positioned to be around people that are going to help you come up with new ideas and keep working through something that could be very challenging.
For me, the math, a couple different, there's real math and there's personal math, right? To me, I lived in cities, I'd been part of that rat race, if you will. I'd seen, and I loved it. Chicago was where I grew up and became the Kentucky boy in Chicago type thing. I learned tremendous things from the people there. The math for me was opportunity. And I said, this is a chance not only to really create a business and be one of a few instead of one of 10,000 in San Francisco or New York. And also, this is a chance for me to be an entrepreneur in a state that needs it and a state that gave my family the opportunity for us to thrive. I mean, I don't take it for granted that because my dad, who used education to get out of India, he had to he couldn't pay his tuition 1 month and was going to get kicked out of school, and a wealthy businessman that he knew gave him $10 that he paid back 9 days later. I mean, what's the difference between me selling fruit on the side of the road or being in front of you here speaking? It's very slim, in my opinion, and I think there's a lot of people like that. So for me, the personal math was, I can do something impactful with my life because, look, bluntly, in my age, in my journey, I said, do I really want to be 65 and say I made a bunch of great PowerPoints? And it was a wake-up moment for me. It was my own personal journey, and I said I didn't want to do that. I'd rather go down swinging and fighting and in a ball of flames, saying that, hey, you know what? We tried to change the world, trying to change people's lives. And when you talk about social entrepreneurship, that's a big-handed way of saying change the world. That's what social entrepreneurs want to do. And you can do it in many different ways. And I think the way we chose to do it was through being a for-profit company that does have social bones built into it. So for me, the math it made sense from a risk standpoint. It made sense from a financial standpoint. If I was in New York, we'd have been probably poached, all our talent probably poached at a price I couldn't have afforded because we just don't have playing that same level. But short of it is that it's been very good to us, and we feel that it's a great place for us to get back, and it's home. It's a great place to live, and we love it.
Julia, anything to add?
Yeah, I think that similarly, well, it's interesting. Your environment influences the way you think and who you are. And the environment we choose to live in does that. That's part of why IC Change is, why I wanted IC Change to be, is because as the climate changes, we're fundamentally going to be changing as human beings, right? So I live in a town in New Orleans that's surrounded by flood walls and dependent on pump infrastructure for its survival. So everywhere I look every day, I see the problem and I'm reminded of it and I'm thinking about it and I'm thinking through my community, and I think the limitation that we've faced, in addition to talent, which we've been able to source just working distributed, has been, of course, capital. And so if you did live in New York, or if I lived in New York, and my sister does, and I have family members in New York, you're surrounded by capital, and that's what you see every day. I go to New York, I'm talking to people to invest in IC Change, and I want to work with people and talented people and their resources in different cities. But I'm choosing to live in New Orleans because I don't want money to be the thing that I see every day when I'm walking around. I want to see my community and the problem that we're solving for. And I'm inspired by them every single day. And we've just been able to learn so much faster. So for us, the innovation has been, and the insights have been faster, and I'm rooted in place. And I think at the end of the day, that's what I want IC Change to be, is for anyone anywhere in the world to love where they live and to be inspired by it and be motivated to protect it.
I think I've heard from each of you that you have significant roots, connections, contacts, or networks that you've cultivated in larger cities. And just before the panel started, Ankur, we were talking a bit about the concept of getting out, and that success itself, coming from a rural community, is in getting out of that community. And I was hoping to sort of dig past sort of those two simplistic points, right? One of which, all resources exist in major cities, which we know is not the truth. And also the idea that success has to be outside of rural or smaller urban settings. I'm sure this has been something that's come up for each of you in different contexts. I'm sure it brings up some personal and emotional things as well. Be really grateful to hear your perspectives on how you've come to terms with that, and sort of how it's led you to make decisions about how you orient yourself and your enterprise on that journey.
I can start. While yes, all resources aren't just in big cities, but 75% of venture capital is in California, New York, and Boston, right? That's a real fact. There is a capital constraint. There's lack of institutional investors. There's a lot of things that you can say. There's pros and cons everywhere, is what I've learned. There's pros to be in San Francisco or New York to have a tech company, and there's cons. There's different ones in Kentucky, right? We solve for them. I've been able to build a strong network from my network from the University of Chicago to my work in the Valley, and I basically have been good at keeping in touch with resources that have helped me. I have tremendous mentorship in Louisville and in Kentucky. For those of you who are familiar with the Endeavor, we have one of the 4 chapters of Endeavor US in Louisville, which has the founder of Humana, founder of Texas Roadhouse, founder of you name it. These are billionaire entrepreneurs who give me time and help me solve my problem. So while it may be less, I don't think it's scarce. I think that you have to find it, but organizations sometimes have to be the front runners of pulling these people out, because entrepreneurs like myself don't have access to some of these people without some help, right? But for me, one of the things that I'll kind of end with is that when you talk about a lot of the problems we're doing, right? We went to people think, oh, the poor people in coal country, the poor people in East Kentucky. No, people are hardworking, they're polite, they're wonderful, they're good human beings, and at the end of the day, all they want to do is have security, feed their family, and have the dignity of a skill, right? They want to have that dignity in motion. We have a program in the poorest zip code in Atlanta, 1 mile from downtown, where it's 100% African American, 60% women, and the instructor there is one of our graduates from Eastern Kentucky, from rural America, who I worried when we went down there to do it, would he connect with that population? And I said, well, I mean, they have a lot in common. They have everything in common. They have the exact same, they just want the exact same things. Human beings want the exact same things regardless of place. So when you break it down like that and say that the person in Eastern Kentucky can resonate with the individual in West Atlanta who had to drop out of college because their mom got sick and she had to work 2 jobs to pay for the house bill, right? But he said, hey, I did this, you can do this too, and change your lot in life. That's where it becomes really powerful, and that where the rural and urban sort of divide, if you will, kind of comes a lot closer. So I've witnessed that firsthand, and I think that while there's a lot of truth to being in smaller, rural, geographically different areas, it is just different. It is not perfect, and neither is a metropolitan area having a set of different problems. That's my take on it. And if we need to solve those, we have resources like Nation Swell, Endeavor, my mentor network. I've got a speed dial and a lot of very successful people that help me a lot. So I think it's about building your network, and if you want to be wherever you want, that's key.
I can speak a little bit to that as well. How many of you ate food today? Hopefully all of you, unless you're doing that fasting, the 16-hour fasting or whatever. That's weird. But how many of you have been to a urban garden or a farm in the past 2 weeks? Probably none of you. It's cold, it's winter, they're mostly frozen over. Oh, she has? Okay. One person, thank you, Julia.
Does Whole Foods count?
No.
Okay.
But that food, 99% of our food is grown in rural areas, and we eat every single day. You have some rooftop gardens, some greenhouses in the city, but we are so intimately connected with our food resources, but we're so far from what that means. Most of our financial capital is in the cities, even ag tech. St. Louis is one of the biggest ag tech investors, and they're still a large metropolis. And so that connection is something that we're trying to bridge in part with education, but also with technology platforms. You know, my favorite question is, well, how do you get farmers to use an online platform? Farmers invented tractors. Those came before cars. Those came before some of our biggest technological innovations happened because of agriculture, because we're feeding people. And so that connection and that understanding of this is where our food, this is where our livelihood comes from, is really important. And so building that connection, not just in knowledge, but in resources and bridging that gap is how we're gonna feed our future and ourselves. And Whole Foods is a good start, but we gotta dig a little deeper.
Yeah, I could echo that. Just to that point, farmers are brilliant, and the idea that farmers are anti-science is insane. They live and breathe science more than anyone every day that I ever talked to on Capitol Hill, or working as a climate science reporter in DC. And that was a fundamental. Is that again, there are universals, and there's talent that's available and insights and knowledge that everyone has to contribute to this, particularly around climate change. In terms of how I've developed a network, we are creating a network. So we have citizens collaborating with scientists, they're local civic leaders, and journalists. So we're a collaborative platform that allows people to see differences and how their local geography or community is being impacted by climate change, as well as similarities. Because we're transdisciplinary, a lot of the networks we've developed have been, around conferences or, being able to do kind of remote distance meetings like this. This is a perfect example of how I've developed a network. But I think that, again, being a social media tech startup, I'm a woman of color doing this in New Orleans, Louisiana. So I've accepted the challenge that has been thrown at me, that and this has not been easy, and it will not be easy. But I think Lady Gaga kind of laid it out at the Oscars the other night. You just have to just keep at it and never give up. I've accepted that because this is worth it. When it comes to solving for climate change, it's worth it.
So for me, I think I grew up in a small rural environment, and then I've been sort of out of that environment for a while. But I enjoy going back because I think that it's a part of who I am, and it's what makes me impactful today in what I do. And I've just been very diligent about putting myself in environments where I can cultivate networks. And I think what's particularly interesting about Native American communities is that one, their the sovereign aspect of their communities often means that they are sort of laying their own roadmap. So they're not necessarily taking direction from a state or a local government. They are laying out their own rules. They're often sitting on committees at the federal level, deciding how important decisions like how they're going to account for certain things in their budget is going to be viewed by the federal government. So they've had the opportunity to really sort of chart what it means to sort of be a community in a larger country. And so I think a lot of the younger people that grow up in these communities sort of think that they want to get out, but then there's often a great opportunity to go back and really sort of work within an environment where you can truly craft how that environment is going to evolve. And so it's been an interesting experience for me when I think about hiring and cultivating the up and coming Native talent. I personally think that it's great to sort of go out, get exposure to different environments like larger firms in New York or smaller entrepreneurial environments in California, and then sort of take all those learnings back and bring it to your home community. And then I think, but there's obviously other opinions that you could sort of stay in your home environment and sort of learn within those confines. So again, I think sort of back to my answer to the last question, it's all very personal. I think you want to cultivate the environments that are going to help you grow as a person. And if that means that you live in a big urban environment and you're still having an impact nationally, then that's fine. And if you want to spend most of your time in those areas that you're impacting, that's also fine.
I think you've each touched upon the way that you've generated sort of an aggregation of resources around your efforts. And success engenders success. Sort of people are attracted to that. Along those lines, for somebody who's just getting started, and as you sort of reflect back on when you were just getting started, and maybe you didn't have sort of, even a proof of concept to lean on, or or a credential that people recognize. How did you first start to tap into the depths of resources that did exist in that environment, so that you could start building something? Was it on the kindness of strangers? Was it sort of an intentional, sort of nose to the grindstone building? What worked for each of you? Taking you back?
It's a painful journey.
You look like you're stressing about it.
Well, so for me, so it started back in 2014 when I got to see firsthand, uncovered a really complex problem. And I actually was in the middle of an MBA program, so I had taken a year off to explore this. which was already a little taboo to leave after your first year of business school. And so I came back, and my first thought was not, oh, let me start a company. It was, this is a really cool thing. It's a big problem. I think I'm uniquely capable at addressing a aspect of it. What can I do here and now to sort of test this hypothesis of mine? And then I thought, okay, well, I'm here. I was at Harvard Business School. There's a ton of resources here. Let me see if I can get an executive education program designed for Native investment professionals. And so with that in mind, I did a lot of work, honestly. I mean, I think that you can have ideas and you can have access to the environment that you want to support, but it really does come down to having a compelling offering. And so what worked for me was thinking one, small and realistic, like what can I do here and now, and not necessarily getting overwhelmed by a big picture, and then two, putting together a compelling offering to make that idea reality. And then sort of ancillary to that was just people believing in me. I think there's an element of luck. You have to be at the right place at the right time and have someone resonate with the narrative that you're telling. And thankfully, there were people that agreed, and they were like, yes, this is awesome, let's do this program. And really, the program at HBS was sort of what started, everything else.
I would say I'm still figuring it out. I'm honestly recently full-time with Hiveland, and it's something I've been working on for the past year and a half. I've been doing bee projects, but I think the biggest advice is just staying focused. Everyone is enthusiastic about bees. They're awesome. And so they all have an idea that they want to share, or an understanding or a concept that they think that you should kind of integrate, and really keeping that focus and asking the people who you're trying to serve, asking the farmers and continuously going back to them is going to serve you in the best way. And that you can then turn around and bring to the people who actually do want to help. So we've gotten primarily grants and bootstrapping and prize money that we're working with that's been foundational in building what we need and providing those resources, because we've been asking the questions that other people aren't and keeping as much focus on the single thing that we're working on as possible.
I think my message, and trying to summarize, is pragmatic persistence, right? The hypothesis that kept me going was that Kentucky needs technology too. There's smart people everywhere. And that because there's and Kentucky spends $2 billion annually on IT spend outside of Kentucky. So those three things made me say, well, why can't we do some of that here? Why we need jobs, we need diversification of economies. It was all right in front, the pieces were right in front of us, but it takes time, and it takes sometimes very long, and 3 times as long as you want it to take, and it doesn't move at the speed of entrepreneurship, so it's pragmatic persistence. We had so many people who were rooting for us, but they didn't help us, right? And that's okay. But don't say you're going to help us and not help us, right? That's the worst thing to do. So for entrepreneurs, the best answer you can give them is a yes. The second best is a quick no. And we're super appreciative of that. But the whole idea of my own mission and purpose was that I felt, while this is hard, it's also fulfilling for me. Like I told you earlier, I was afraid of just saying I made a lot of great PowerPoints, and I didn't really use my passion that I had inside me of always wanting to start something and make impact and change the world at some degree, and I never had a chance to do it. I did it. I mean, bluntly, if I go out, if I shut down tomorrow, I go to bed very well tomorrow night knowing we helped a ton of people and we made some systematic change into how universities are looking at apprenticeship level programs, how companies are saying we'll take non-college graduates from diverse backgrounds, how diversification and inclusion is a ROI driver, not just a nice buzzword. So we've done a lot of that. So for me, you asked about kindness to strangers and stuff, but there were companies that I was telling, I know what we're doing. I know what I'm doing. They know what they're doing. Give us a chance. And companies did give us a chance. One Fortune 100 company that gave us a chance, we're now a preferred vendor with them. So now they call us for work. And not only that, we're able to give it at a competitive rate that also creates jobs 2 hours west of where our headquarters is, right? People can live in their homes, live in their areas, must have internet connectivity, which is a issue we're solving, but they can do that. You know, we've cracked the code on that in our state, where frankly no one else was going to come help us. I mean, I've sat on committees and think tanks in Kentucky where I've realized we're the 47th state that companies are going to look at in some of the, if you're looking at the demographic and the real data. So we had to solve the problem internally for ourselves, and with that comes a passion and, like I call it, pragmatic persistence. But always be aware of what happens if you don't make it the next month or the next quarter or the next year, and be okay with that. But make sure you give it your all and make sure you're smart about it. I think one of the biggest things about our story is that we change a lot of people's bias about not only people in Kentucky, but also people in urban areas that are now going to be thriving at global companies because we've got partnerships with them. So it's very rewarding, but it takes time, and don't worry, it'll all work out. Just keep fighting. So yeah.
I love that. These are great stories. In terms of my earliest kind of phases of when I knew we needed to continue, it's very interesting. I guess what I would attribute to our success has been, I'm mixed race and I don't accept labels. I rather see what we have in common and what we're needing to solve together jointly versus difference. So IC Change started as a public media project, a radio project, not a business, and not even involving scientists. But I got invited to a science conference in Denver, and I did a presentation using audio and stories. And the scientists, it was about the socioeconomic impacts of, remote sensing data, very wonky. And I didn't even know what I was doing there, but I listened really deeply and realized that they had the same problem, understanding the impacts of climate change. And I did the presentation, and I got invited to present at NASA JPL, and a think tank in DC out of this rural 2,000 people project. As people came and started using it and started talking about it, I knew it was something that people wanted and needed, and they were providing a service that wasn't out there. Unfortunately, we didn't get funded for 2 years, so I had to work from 5 to 9 a.m. in the morning in New Orleans at the local paper, and then from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. until we got our first funding from NASA. And then I started asking questions like, why can't people talk to satellites? And I learned also how to fail. That was another really important part, is that we have failed forward many times until we've landed a sustainable business model, one that is solving for two existential crises. One is the business model in journalism that is failing, that we've innovated around, as well as the climate change crisis. So as you the more challenges you solve or overcome, I guess you become more confident in your ability to weather them.
Those are all, I think, very significant insights. And, as somebody who started my first business in the New York City area, I feel like there are a lot of threads around entrepreneurship that are pretty universal. So there's a lot that anyone can take away from those experiences, on top of course, the nuances of what it's like in each individual market. I have a few quick individual questions that I do want to ask. In the meantime, if you're sort of thinking of some things that you want to ask this candid, astute, and thoughtful panel, start gathering up those thoughts, and we'll go to questions in just a couple seconds. I think Meagan, for you, one question that I have is, with 567 nations in the United States and over 600 in Canada, and the geographical spread that comes with that, what is it like to sort of work across such incredible diversity? I mean, I think in most contexts, Native Americans is sort of lumped into this just singular bucket. But as you've noted time and time again, it's so diverse. When you sort of overlay geography and sort of spread there, how do you sort of navigate that within the kind of work that you're doing?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because it is true that unless you're exposed to these communities, oftentimes people think that they're just sort of one and the same. And it's something that even I, as a Native American, I learn something new about a different nation every week because they are so different. And so it's been like a wonderful research and journey for me as well. And I would say what the Sovereign Nations Group aims to do is we find commonalities in some of the types of problems. So while each nation may have a different set of cultures or they might have different even economic goals, they're often grappling with the same big problems. Like we have oftentimes casinos or natural resources that we're trying to either diversify from or we're trying to manage that income effectively. Other issues may be we want to make sure that our up and coming generation is equipped with the tools to make sure that they carry on the cultures and the values of our community into perpetuity. And so because of those big sort of similarities, that is really the underpinning of when we work with a community. Those are sort of the guiding principles. And then I think it's honestly like a privilege to just listen and learn and hear about the unique qualities of all of these communities.
Yeah, and I think, Dawn, you've raised the sort of universality principle a couple of times just by asking who ate today, right? And the sort of importance of food in our life, and those commonalities can be pretty far-reaching. In that you've sort of, no pun intended, seeded in my mind the idea of, with something that is so common, so central to our lives, how is it that you go about engaging with people in urban centers for something that can seem like a rural problem, but really is a universal problem?
I think I'm speaking to a crowd of a lot of people that worked in urban farms and urban agriculture, so we're probably all face the same challenges in a lot of what we do. So I just spent a week out west, and we moved 400 hives to a dozen different farm locations. And it's really hard to bring people from the city to that experience. So like, what does it mean to move a few hundred hives? And like, how many times do you get stung? And like, what happens if, things just aren't going your way? It's muddy, you're stuck in, like, there's just all these things that happen when you're delivering hives to farms. And that's really hard to communicate to people. But some of my favorite things to do to connect people with those bees is just observation frames, to conferences or to a pitch event we were at 2 weeks ago. We had just a frame of bees, and you just have that. And for people to be able to see it a few inches from their face, they connect with it in a really different way. And they see how cool it is and how interesting those bees really are. And then you get to tell that story. They're captivated by these tiny little creatures. And then you get to remind them, like, oh, this is like, we need these. Like every single thing that you eat, okay, 30% according to stats, but that's changing. But these things are critical to your food and everything that you're consuming. So education, engagement, and also just crazy stories too of like, when you're moving 400 hives, and I only got stung a dozen times this time, but it's still sharing that and connecting with people in that way is a good way to start.
Great. And, Julia, as somebody who was a reporter and sort of has created a community of reporters, what's that journey been like to build really a virtual community that's engaging on a topic that, as you say, you see around you every day, but they don't necessarily. How has that sort of journey been in bringing those people together and finding a common purpose?
Inspiring. Every day it's inspiring. I think the basic premise of IC Change is that climate change is not just for scientists. Like, we can see change in our backyards, and that everyone is an expert. So, and that innovation can come from anywhere, just like very much in line with our conversation, that geography shouldn't be the boundary, it should be the asset. And so, I log into IC Change every day and I see just organically posts from around the world, and I'm surprised by them and inspired by them. Our regular users who've come to us over the years, who've been submitting year over year. I mean, we have like these personal relationships with people all across the country who are often trend identifiers. And then we also have people who come to us complaining, they're complaining at their city about flooding, or they're complaining about how hot it is and whatnot. And just by the very act of paying attention over time, they learn, they become experts. We have people we also use IC Change as an equity builder when it comes to allowing community voices into the planning and adaptation process. We have people who have never wanted to ever go to a public meeting because they can't. They have multiple jobs, they have kids, they have no time. But by virtue of using IC Change and collecting data, contributing their stories about being impacted by climate change, they start to see that their voice matters, and they start to get involved in civic processes. And we're actually starting to measure that, called, basically resilience to climate change comes down to our social connections, It really is. It's about those neighbor-to-neighbor relationships, feeling like you have a nice shared identity with place. And people are having that shared identity with place with their specific neighborhoods or cities and strengthening those connections, but at the same time, seeing relationships across geographies. And I think that's the thing about climate change. It is historically been a communication challenge because the problem is so big and we're so involved in our daily lives that seeing the opportunity to connect beyond boundaries in ways that can unite us are kind of this thing that makes me feel optimistic about what is otherwise a bummer topic. It asks of us as human beings to think of ourselves in totally different ways.
Yeah, and speaking about connections, you were a reporter earlier in your career. I worked with a lot of reporters in my prior career, and primarily in sort of local and regional, with local and regional media outlets. And I imagine that sort of there are benefits to generally knowing most of the reporters that are in your town. But somehow, Ankur, you showed up on The Daily Show in a feature with Hassan Minhaj, which was pretty epic, and you should definitely check it out. But how did something like that come about? And especially when you sort of think about, you probably know the dozen or so reporters that would generally be interested in something like that. What happens when a big show comes to town? And
Yeah. So Hassan and I were in a spelling bee in sixth. No, I'm kidding. That's not. No, you're right. We were just doing our thing. Don't people think that we have some massive PR and marketing department? It's not. It's an intern and my assistant and me and info@interab.com. That's really, we respond to email. But what had happened, so what had happened was when we embarked on this Eastern Kentucky pilot where we said, let's see if we can really change, really get people into an IT career with upward mobility and really, took that on, we kept it really quiet. We weren't sure if it would work. We knew the failure points. Can they learn the curriculum? Will people hire non-traditional hires? All the things that you're worried about. But when I realized it was working, when I saw the hard work, and I saw what the common thread between those who succeeded in our program and those who didn't was that they were usually like praying for years or months saying, please give me one chance, or calling out to the universe for please help something that will change my life. And they viewed this opportunity as that. That's how humbling that experience was. So once I realized this was working, and there's really good, hungry, driven people that can learn this without any problem. We started getting more attention. I started talking to more outlets because I kind of wanted to knock down the bias of hiring a non-traditional graduate, all those things. But it was just local, like you said. But it was important. When we go to companies, the first thing they do is they Google you. They Google you. They see, oh, you have a few nice articles. You won Business of the Year. You won these awards. It's a bit of just a due diligence checkbox for vanity's sake. But that was that. What happened was, and how the Daily Show came about, was kind of amazing. Our initial pilot was funded by the Appalachian Regional Commission out of DC. And for those of you, just to give you a quick overview, they are responsible for economic stimulation and development and workforce development in 19 states that make up the Appalachian region, Kentucky being one of them. They had, we had gotten turned. I of course said, here's what we need. Here, I put the, the kind of the statement of work together in the proposal. That here's what we need and here's what it costs, and I just left it to the partners in Eastern Kentucky to figure out how to fund it. That's who they contacted. They said they're interested, and it turned out to be one of the most successful programs they'd had in many years, and it with real economic ROI. So in the initial budget that was put forth, they were going to remove the $100 million they allocated the Appalachian Regional Commission. It was in danger of being cut, but most of it was because none of that money really helps, and so they were looking for a success story about how it helped, and we were it. So we got a call from the Daily Show, and I remember this. I got a call, and it's from the producer, and he said, or he gets an email, and I said, "Is this real?" And so it's long, and just a little background on me. I performed in Second City when I was in grad school, so I'm a big fan of the show. So I thought I was like someone just pulling my leg a little bit, but I emailed them back, got a call, and they kind of set forward what they wanted to do. They asked me questions about it, and they said, "Great, well," and it was a 3-course sort of interview process. It wasn't easy, and so but they asked good questions. By the third interview, and that was with Hassan and Trevor and all those guys, and they were like, they kind of laid out what they wanted to do, and I remember saying, "Hold up, one thing I was very big on. I said, I want to do this. This is great, and it helps us in many ways, but you cannot come here and make fun of these people and what we're doing." I go, if you're doing that, I'm out. And I just need your assurance that that's not going to happen, because there's people in our program whose houses were about to be foreclosed on, and they just went on LinkedIn and got a $50,000 a year job. They got the comment. This is the sort of things that are just slowly moving the needle. And I said, that's what you're, and they said, nope, we appreciate the comment. I got verbal confirmation from the powers that be that said, this is not what we're doing. We want to come and showcase this because we believe it can be transformed for the whole country. So if you've seen it, you'll see what I mean. But if you're not, I encourage you to Google it. Hassan was great. Of course, the novelty of it, and a son of immigrants goes into Eastern Appalachia or Eastern Kentucky and Appalachia to go teach IT to how to work Eastern Kentucky. I mean, there's a little bit of a novelty factor there. I get that, but it is a very human story where, Kentucky was very good to my family, and I think it's just a way of me to kind of take what I've learned from my travels and my experience and give back to a place that was good to us. And I don't see that's, and it's as simple as that. But I'll stop there. But you all, if you want to see it, you can Google Coal Country or Brown in Town or something like that. That usually will find it. But he was very good, very, very gracious, and it was a tremendous experience. And that led to people emailed us after that. People said, I want to work for your company. People said, I want to give you work. We need a talent development program in our company. And those are how that happened, how the TED Talk happened, how the other conferences have been able to present this sort of story at. It's important to get out. I mean, I have to run a company day to day, but this is so important to get this message out that there is so much potential. Just like Julie was saying, I mean, climate change is a big thing, but if you don't talk about it, no one's going to realize it, and you're going to be left with your own biases. And I think that's worth fighting for.
So I have been selfish in this conversation and asking all the questions so far. We would love to hear from you. So, anybody have any questions for our panelists?
I think a lot of it is about, I feel the same way, and that's actually one of my challenges. It's like, do I want to move to the Midwest? And do I want to go back and stay there? Would I have the most impact? And then at the end of the day, I don't think I would, because I want to build this as something that can help more than just the single small town. There was a population of 2,800, the town that I grew up in. And I feel like this can be something that can have a trickle-down effect on them, but not really be the basis of anything foundational there. So honestly, asking yourself what what impact you want to have and what impact does that place need. If you going back there and someone just contributing to the small economy does add value and that makes you happy, then like that's the best thing you can be doing.
I think it's a very personal choice. It's a blue pill, red pill moment you must take, everyone must do. It really is. I had it myself. Do I want to be in Chicago and go through this corporate ladder and get to eventually become partner and live here and eventually move to the suburbs and do that? I mean, I kind of charted out what the blue pill path was. And the red pill path was something adventurous, something different, something that I couldn't get out of my head. So, but when you take it, it's not as, it's not as dramatic as I'm trying to make it out to seem. But for me, it was very important for me to build purpose in my own life, and starting a company was the first part of that purpose. The second was using my company to really change the world a little bit, or at least my community. I live in Louisville, Kentucky. It's not a small city. We have a lot of great amenities there. We may not have everything, but I'm an hour drive from a lot of major cities. I'm a 2-hour flight from most of the country, right? So for us, it was not a huge. For me, it was not a huge sacrifice in terms of, oh my gosh, I'm not in New York or I'm not in Chicago. Now, granted, I do miss 4 a.m. meals sometimes because nothing is open at 4 a.m. in our town. But when you have 2 young kids, you don't usually do that very often anyway. But I think that there is a bias, there is a risk. Yes, people tell me all the time, oh, I wish I could go back to Kentucky. We have a lot of smart Kentuckians who live in New York and San Francisco and are one I met just today. But then that's the thing. I wish I could go back. And yes, there's not as many opportunities, but nowhere else as many opportunities as New York or San Francisco and major metro areas. So it's either those 20 cities or the rest of the world, right? I don't think that you have to give up one or the other. I think you can operate from either a major metro and service the rural area, or you work in a non-traditional Midwest town and still have access. We have clients in New York, we have clients in San Francisco, we have clients in Atlanta. I mean, in Detroit. I don't think that the geography piece of it, but getting over the bias. Can Kentuckians really turn out code? Can you really do this at that price point? And can you give me the quality I need? We had a long slog to prove that, and we did it. And now companies are coming to us, which is a nice change of the entrepreneur story, right? But my last piece is that it's a very personal decision. I think there's opportunities everywhere if you just and sometimes maybe you have to create your own. So it's a blank canvas in some places, in my opinion.
I agree about the bias, particularly around, where does the rural community fit into this? And I'm at a panel. I'm in Miami for a big media conference, and there was a smart city panel, and someone said, well, we're in a rural community, we don't have access to broadband, and we don't have access to smart city sensors. And it's the vision of what a smart city looks like that is the bias. You can have sensors talking to low radio power frequencies without the internet and do it at a lower cost and better. You can articulate a smart city, you can articulate data and visually. You don't have to have everyone using their phones to access data. And I think that solving those problems in rural communities solves them for the rest of the world who are coming online, who are resource constrained. And I think that's the bigger market and the bigger opportunity often. And so it really is about what lens are you choosing to see the world that you're in, or the community that you're in? What are the opportunities? And then figuring out ways to overcome those challenges, if that's what you choose to do, because the quality of life is pretty amazing in small towns. I've had the most amazing conversations with people who I don't have. It's a diversity of experience that is so special in some of these communities that it might be worth the payoff. It's your choice.
I'd like to add one last thing, but I should have mentioned, is your biggest hurdle, as the biggest hurdle for most people, is opportunity cost. I tell people who want to be entrepreneurs, they're like, well, why should I give up my $300,000 a year job to be an entrepreneur? I was like, well, think about someone who doesn't have that option. Their only choice is success. That's why most successful entrepreneurs were not the most gifted, most well-to-do growing up, they were the hungriest, right? They had seen what difficulty was and they overcame it. So that is a reverse bias, that's a reverse hurdle for those who have education, who have opportunities, who have jobs. Do I really take that leap? Some people don't have that choice, they have to do it.
Great. Other questions?
Mine's easy, just get people outside. And just get people engaging with their food and the environment around them. We have nature deficit disorder today, so just get people outside.
I think one of the things that we've been fortunate of is market forces, right? So in our situation, there is a shortage of tech workers. There is a decrease in the H-1B visas. There is there's a shortage of supply. You name it. Every market factor is in our favor right now. So when I go to companies and say we need 400 people in 2 years, I'm like, you're not going to get it recruiting. And now, as we've seen our training program, training someone is now cheaper than recruiting someone. So that is flipped. That's new data that companies are now gravitating towards, because they're like, even if I find the 10 best engineers, they're all gone, or 8 of them are gone in less than 12 months. That does not help me compete. That does not help me this. When you take someone in our program that we kind of gave that first chance to, there's a loyalty component that's kind of built in. It's an implicit loyalty that they're like, hey, thank you for helping me. I want to help this company succeed. And I've seen that in my own company, Humboldt, where my senior team goes on weekends to help the junior developers, and the junior developer is solving a problem on, at night for some. I mean, there's a lot of beautiful sort of synergies there. So in our situation, the broader conversation has been this inequality gap, this skills gap, this hiring of technology talent shortage, the declining success rates of college graduates. I mean, all these sort of things are. I'm like, hello, we've got a solution right here, and we've been doing that for 3 years, and so that's been helpful for us. So the broader conversation kind of came to us in our situation.
So I would say for me, the sort of another reason that has led to my geographic decision of being based here in New York is I've sort of taken the responsibility to have conversations to share this message. And so when I was thinking about how can I get this message out, it was who could be able to, with this information, be able to help the community that I care about. And so what I found was when I was starting the company, I was going around to all these firms on Wall Street and saying, hey, I need to help a group of nations manage a lot of capital. You should care about this. And a lot of the firms that I went to, firms that we all know, Morgan Stanley, UBS, some of them had a small practice where they were maybe helping a couple of tribes, but many of those individuals, when they saw me, they were like, oh, I didn't know that like Native Americans lived in New York, and or like the city, and I've never met someone from the Mohawk Nation. And so when I started realizing this, I was like, oh, this is, and they were really liking this story. They were like, it wasn't that they didn't care about the communities. They had just been in an environment where they had never had exposure, which I think is usually the more common than just, flat out not caring. And so I think I sort of thought, where can I best share this message and get the people that I need to be on my team to support my cause? And so for that reason, mine wasn't necessarily market driven. It was more of a grassroots approach of thinking about how can I uniquely get out into my network to share. And it's definitely a slower process. But I think there's even still, I would say that since I've started, there's far more people that I feel, and a lot of firms now that actually know, about what's going on in the communities that I serve.
Thanks for that. I got a lot out of our panel here this evening, that no matter where you are, really, it takes 3 times as long to build something. That big data alone misses out on the smaller data, which can be really transformative to building a product that speaks to people. The idea of thinking of geography not as a barrier, but as an asset was a really powerful one for me. And sort of getting over the bias that exists around it can be really powerful in unlocking that asset component. I did also take away that the talent struggle is real, but really when you approach that as a problem to be solved for, it's the same as the other trade-offs that you make in any journey. So those were the things that I took away, but I'd love for each of you to maybe spend 30 seconds as we wrap up just to share if you were speaking to an aspiring entrepreneur, an aspiring social entrepreneur who was looking to get started in a geography outside of a major metropolitan center, what's the one piece of advice that you'd want to equip them with?
Probably more than anything else, know your network and build your network in the place that matters most. If you're working with farmers, talk to farmers, go be there. If you really need also the resources from the city, then you need to build that network as well. I mean, your network is your net worth. It doesn't matter if you're in the city or in the country. And also, you can get Wi-Fi anywhere. Almost. You'd be surprised. Some of these like Wi-Fi in rural areas, you're like, yeah, little cafes. Okay. We'll trade shops. We'll trade cafes.
Julia, you want to go?
Oh, sorry, the internet was unstable, ironically. Golly, you know what? When Icy Change was global and we were just, I really missed seeing it in the details and innovating right in my own backyard. And so keeping kind of your eyes open for the opportunities to solve problems with your technology or your product really close in your daily life it just, it never gets old. Like it never stops. And it's wonderful. It keeps me going. So just seeing the opportunity, just don't be dismissive of where you are. It's just that lens. It's just flicking on the opportunity-seeking brain, and that includes training talent. Like your stories about training talent are just so inspiring because I've seen people who use us in our community in New Orleans start to talk just like a city planner or hydrologist. And so you really making sure that you even use the opportunity lens for the people around you. That's really fantastic.
Okay. I've had the opportunity to listen to two people's answers, so that helps. So I would say I have three things. One, I agree that network is very important because you need people supporting you throughout what you're trying to accomplish. Two, I would say sort of potentially the opposite of focus is being opportunistic. So not being too rigidly committed to what you think is the right solution for the marketplace, and being open to adjusting to address things that are falling into your lap. That's something that I did, and I thought that the product would be X, and then people were asking for Y, and I was a little bit concerned, but ultimately decided to give them what they wanted, and then eventually they wanted X as well. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And then third, this idea that it's a deeply personal decision about where you're located, and that there are trade-offs, and that you can have the same sort of impact regardless of where you are.
Oh gosh, this is still three people, and I still didn't get a formulated answer. But I think if you were going to be looking at a geography, and it depends on a couple of factors. One, where is it? Two, what industry are you in? And 3, what is the model? What is the business model, right? And if you can take those 3 things and you couple it with some of the comments here, like network, right? I would want every community has hidden gems of successful entrepreneurs, business leaders, people who want to see the community impacted, and who would be welcome, who would welcome you with open arms to be part of it. Unfortunately, sometimes, even though that's all goodwill, it doesn't really help you move the needle. Everyone wants certain things to happen, but sometimes they're not equipped with their network resources or abilities to help you. So I think that what I would do in that one piece, after kind of combining all the different things that were set up here and those added things, I would find out who in this country is doing the closest that you want to do, or something similar, that is doing it at scale, is doing it as successful, that may be one of the better people in the world, and ask them out for coffee. I mean, I have done that on a number of occasions where it's caused me to turn left on my own business models, or it put me something where I thought, oh my gosh, that was the missing ingredient to turn this from a feel-good project to a business case that actually had real ROI. I mean, these are the kind of things that you have to put yourself in those situations, those uncomfortable situations, right? Sometimes. But you'd be surprised. I mean, I'm never surprised at how many people are willing to meet with me when I ask them. And for fear of name dropping, I won't even mention. But I mean, but it's like that was it. I had a bourbon, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to email this guy, or I'm going to LinkedIn this girl, and they're up too. So I was like, okay. So I think those all are resonant. But you know. Fight the good fight. That's what we all are trying to do, but we're also doing it in a sort of pragmatic way and systematic way. And one piece of advice that I got that was tremendously important to me a couple years ago was by the founder of Humana, Mr. David Jones. He said, "Profit is not a bad word," and that was something that resonated with me, because profit allows you, even for nonprofits or social entrepreneurs. Profit allows you to reinvest in your company, to do bigger things, to give people more benefits and bonuses and uplift them and things like that. So that was something that I initially had felt a little guilt about, that we're making money on this and that, but not really. No, it changed my whole trajectory. So something like that. Those are kind of the nuggets I would share with you. But thank you for having me, and I hope that it was a little bit enlightening. It was enjoyable for me as well.
Yeah, and it's amazing how much a LinkedIn message and the promise of caffeine can go. So listen, thank you all for being here, for sharing so generously of your experiences and your expertise. Can we give our panelists a warm round of applause?